So we talked about the fate of sociology,
Yes.
and you talked me about the spiral development of sociology, and which is an intriguing concept. Yeah, not that sociology is a permanent progress and not a permanent, or you do not see a permanent progress of society at all as a sociologist. You see many backdraws, many backlashes.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Okay. Yes. I mean, I said in the Sociological Revolution that it was a bold move, I guess. Where I was responding in one place to the fact that people say the golden age of sociology was at the fin de siècle time, just before the First World War, and maybe into Weimar Germany for a bit. But since then, we've never reached those heights before. All we have had in recent years was an expansion of sociology and an infusion of paradigms that were largely philosophically based. But it wasn't the golden age of sociology. That's past now, and all that's happening now, you hear this argument frequently. Yeah. All that is happening now is that sociology is just becoming the sort of handmaiden of policy, and we just find the information that governments need in order to implement various policies, or sociology becomes a form of critique or something like that. And the great golden age of sociology is finished. I say in the Sociological Revolution, perhaps it's a bit bold, that the great age of sociology may be yet to come. How do we know that the great age of sociology has diminished, or it will never return, or that it's gone completely? It could be that what's happening now is that sociology is in a quiescent phase, if you will. It's not doing what it was doing. And I say in the book, the great age of sociology could come in 600 years' time.
600 years?
600 years.
Do you think mankind still exists?
Oh, yes.
Or do you think it's a new form of aliens who are going to make sociology?
No, not at all. I say it explicitly in the Sociological Revolution that a great age of sociology is probably in about 600 years' time. Now, why did I say 600 years? There's a place in the civilizing process where Norbert says, there is always something, the phrase is something, there's always a run-up of 3 or 4 centuries before we have a recognizable structure of interdependencies that we can call a nation state. It takes 300 or 400 years, a run-up of that, 300 or 400 years, right? He's talking long-term here in relation to a human biography. It's a long time, 300 or 400 years. So I extrapolated that and thought, well, what we have globally at the moment is the beginnings of nations coming together and coming together in groups of nations. Now, the European Union is an obvious case in point. It's a transnational confederation, and it's a confederation, if you will, of nations. Now, but it's going to take a very long time if the development of individual nation states is anything to go on. The gradual coming together of nations, regionally at first, continentally at first, and then maybe the entire unification of the human race, is a very, very long process into the future. And so I said that sociology will come into its own in about 600 years' time to analyze the integration conflicts and the difficulties that are being experienced by people as the nations that they formerly were part of are gradually dying and disappearing. Where there are a sort of a language has evolved or developed in which people are all speaking one language, and the individual languages like French and Italian and German will eventually gradually disappear as they emerged into larger social units. And so I committed myself to 600 years. But the point about this is the one you raised before, that at the moment you could look in despair at sociology, which I often do. I mean, I just see most of it is simply politics, really, vast amounts of it.
A lot of sociology.
Nearly all is. It's
a lot of sociology is wishful thinking.
Yes,
People
yes.
say it's sociology, but in fact it's all from their very own perspective. They want to have a different distribution of wealth. They want different distribution of power structures between local boards or between genders or these changes, and it's very much wishful thinking, which I think it's a non-Eliasian way.
It is.
Sociology, as the Eliasians see it, is a description of society, and not what you wish for in society.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So, and that is the challenge of sociology properly done, as Elias puts it.
Yeah.
Yes, and when I look at sociology now, I just keep thinking, can it get any worse? I mean, when I read, yes, when I see the British Sociological Association, I get regularly, I see the circulation of their emails for the next conference and this kind of thing, and I read these and it's a kind of it's a sadness that comes over me, that they're talking about neoliberalism. They're talking about resistance to privatization and all of these essentially political arguments. And politics and sociology there are just indistinguishable. Now it seems to me that the opposite should be the case. We should not be getting involved in those kinds of things. So I despair, and also is the language being used. I mean, some of the things I read, I mean, are near unintelligible, with language being used with a level of abstraction that tells us very little. I wish I had thought about this and brought you an example of this, but I do get very sad, seeing this. But anyway, point being, that doesn't mean we should give up on sociology. It just means that sociology properly done is just now a little bit more or a lot more difficult to champion, to continue, to keep to hand the torch on and carry that impetus forward. It's just more difficult now. It doesn't mean to say we should give it up, redefine sociology as politics. No, it just means that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I mean, you've got to be tough. You've got to stick with the project. It's just more difficult. That's what I mean. And in the end, yes, that sociology does sometimes go into phases like this, and then various other developments will occur which will enable it to develop it further. I mean, that's how I see it.
Well, I think there are many questions about this. First of all, I think sociology still does a great contribution to many sciences which are not called sociology nowadays. But if you look into educational sciences, if you look into anthropology and so on, these people are working with sociological theory. They are applying Durkheim, they are applying Weber, they are applying Elias, and that's a big contribution. Where sociology often is hidden under the cloak, it's part of the knowledge of other sciences, so that they see, that's a great approach by Durkheim, which explains my current problem I have in my discipline, and that I think is an important contribution of sociology, which has had done in the past.
This relates to an issue that we talked about before. That what Elias stood for was a kind of sociology. That's what people were into. Certainly I was, and people who call themselves Eliasians. I mean, Eliasians are not like Christians or
No.
someone like that. It's not. That's not
Yeah.
not the point. It's just people who think, and like me and others, that he took further a sociological tradition that he didn't create.
Yeah.
He executed a synthesis of extraordinary explanatory power. I mean, and it was one that was. He didn't always make it clear what the ingredients were. He just put it together, and the crucial part of it is that it's a synthesis that is testable. I mean, that's the point. It's theoretical and empirical, and he always uses empirical materials but he clearly realizes that there's as theoretical synthesis. I mean, Giddens is a good example. Parsons is another one.
Yeah.
If it's not developed in an interplay with evidence, is you immediately the level of abstraction is increased.
Yeah.
And I think that was what it's a workable synthesis. That was the phrase that Gaudsblom used, and I think that's what's extraordinary about it. Yeah, it's a workable synthesis.
But I think you have this great bookshelf, and there are so many books. Of course, I do not know them as well as you do, as it is your bookshelf.
Yeah.
But you have all abstract forms of describing about societies, about human societies in general. I saw a book on Denmark politics and so on, and people are speaking a lot about abstract concepts which are not there, which are not observable. It's
Yes.
like people in physics, they speak about astrophysics, which is not measurable as it is in mechanics. So they are speaking about very theoretical concepts about quarks and so, which are subjects which they cannot observe, but they develop concepts of it, which is legitimate. But on the other hand, in sociology, often people, they do not have evidence, and I think it's one of the greatest achievements of Norbert Elias that he was speaking about a general change of the French society, but he found very clear evidence in historical books about manners, about how people began using a fork in a specific time at the French court, and how this was connected to a change in the society, in the taxation of France, where he connected this financial integration with change in the behavior of people in France at this time, and I think that's a great achievement. Yeah.
And for that, you're dealing with a different kind of abstraction.
Yeah.
That's what is often not understood. I mean, it's pretty clear that what you have in someone like Parsons or in Giddens is a clear awareness take the issue of psychogenesis.
Yeah.
Elias says that you've got to study sociogenesis and psychogenesis at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't, you'll miss the point that people themselves change during social changes. Now, some forms of sociology just ignore that as an issue, but at the same time they acknowledge, say in the case of Parsons, the personality system. Now the personality system, he's got it there, but there's a different kind of abstraction. What you've got in Parsons and in Giddens is an awareness of these issues, but they try to solve it by developing an analytic set of concepts which you can then apply again and again empirically. That's what they want, a common vocabulary, and these concepts are derived and are said to be interconnected. Elias works in a very different way. I mean, the Parsons is absolutely explicit in his indebtedness to Immanuel Kant. He says it quite openly. I am a Kantian. These are the preconditions of action. It's not developed empirically in relation to examples.
Yeah.
It is. Now, Elias would hear that and say that is simply not going beyond philosophy. It's allowing philosophical ways of thinking to dominate your sociology.
Mm-hmm.
And the philosophically, the reason that I got into Hegel was partly because I had to come to terms with Hegel and Marx, because that was what underpinned the Marxian approach to sociology. And big claims were being made by Marxists for the superiority of their particular paradigm. So I got into Hegel. But the crucial thing about Hegel, and I had some in correspondence with and conversations with Elias on this. He was very fond of Hegel. He said, and particularly his phenomenology. He says, because Hegel was a dynamic thinker, and he tried to develop out of culture, history, politics, economics. He took all those into account and said that philosophy emerges out of the whole totality. This is the Hegelian argument. So you could say in many ways most of Western sociology is Kantian most of it is. I mean, Durkheim's mentor was Renouvier, and Max Weber had his Rickert and these other people. Elias was brought up on the Kantianism, but what you got in Marx comes out of Hegel.
Yeah.
And Elias's view was that Hegel is exactly what mine was. I was coming to the same conclusion when we corresponded on this, that what you got, and once you correct for what the absurdities there are in Hegel, well, clearly there are, the basic ideas are intensely processual. The only philosopher to attempt, say, to take the subject-object distinction and say that that's formalistic. The subject and the objects are interrelated. The power of Elias's synthesis was that it was workable. It was not an analytic synthesis. It was one that the concepts emerged in conjunction with materials.